Aloha and welcome to the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center's An Afternoon with the Author. I am your host today. My name is Deidre Teagarden. And if you'd like to find out more information about what we do here at the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center, please visit our website at nvmc.org. It is another lovely Maui afternoon, and we're so excited to have with us today Ms. Jody Chiemi Ching. I'm going to introduce her in just a moment, but as a reminder, we love to get your questions to our different authors. So please write your questions in that little question and answer box at the bottom left of your screen as your questions come to you, and we will get to as many as possible before the end of our time today. And as always, this is being recorded and will be available on our Nisei Veterans Memorial Center YouTube channel in about a week. We encourage you to go there and check out this talk and other talks you may have missed. I guarantee there is something for everyone on our YouTube channel. And of course, we couldn't do what we do here at the center if it weren't for supporters like you and all of our corporate sponsors as well. You saw their logos as you were getting on the call today, so please help me mahalo them. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Jody Chiemi Ching, otherwise known as Chiemi Souen. Chiemi Souen writes to give a voice to Okinawan American descendants of contract sugar plantation workers who immigrated from Okinawa in the early 1900s and remain faceless in literature to this day. Born in Torrance, California and raised in Honolulu, Souen earned her bachelor's degree in Japanese language and literature at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in 1995. In 1998, she received the Okinawan Prefectural Government Scholarship to attend the University of the Ryukyus, where she studied Okinawan language and women's studies. She is also a member of the Ryukyu Koten Afuso Ryu Choichikai USA Hawaii, an Okinawan Classical Music Academy. She is currently the editor of the Hawaii Herald, Hawaii's Japanese American journal. Please help me give a very warm Maui virtual welcome to Ms. Souen. Jody, it's lovely to have you with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for agreeing. So excited to have you today, and just kind of want to jump right into it and talk a little bit about your background and the connection that you have to the Nisei story, both your grandfather, as well as, what you learned over the years through your job.
So my grandfather was a dairyman. So when he tried to enlist, he was actually rejected because he was considered an essential worker. And I knew about the veterans. My dad's side had some of his uncles, but we weren't as connected to that side. And like a lot of veterans didn't speak much about it. So I didn't really learn. I learned the most when I started working for the Herald. And, over the last few years that I was at the Herald, I made, friends with people like Larry Miwa, who's a survivor of the bombing, and then veterans like Shinya Gima and Edward Nakasone, and just talking. I'm so, we're so fortunate to have them still here to talk to, and that they're willing to tell their story. So most of my education about the veterans have been just mostly in the recent years as when I started the Herald.
And how long have you been with the Herald before you became the editor?
So I was with the writing for the Herald just maybe about 2 years before I became editor in April of 2020. I started as a freelancer and then a staff writer for 1 year. And then when Carolyn Morinishi retired, then she asked me to fill her shoes, which are very hard shoes to fill.
I know she's on the call today too, and she's a big friend of ours at the center as well. And I want to talk to you later about, you know, going from or being at the same time an editor and a novelist. But before we get to that, I was really intrigued about your pen name and how you chose that, and if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so when I was writing, getting into poetry and had an interest in literature, I sought out Lois and Yamanaka as a mentor who at first was like, I don't have time, I don't like to teach adults, but I eventually wore her down, I think. And she took me on as a student. And then when it came time to try to pursue publishing, she said, if you're going to be a voice in Okinawan literature, you can't be Jody Ching. So I had to think of a pen name. And after kind of going through my ancestral history, I saw that Souen was kind of at the top of our family tree. I like the name because So, the Japanese kanji for So is the character that gets passed through the generations through the oldest son. All the chonan have So, or it's also read as Mune. So their names either start with So or Mune. And En was kind of like the Enso, and like the cyclical, you know, that spiritual cyclical kind of concept. So I really liked, I thought that name would kind of continue and honor my family's heritage and history. And then Chiemi is the name given to me by my grand aunt, and Chiemi means wisdom and beauty. So I kind of put those together and I thought it sounded good. So we went with Chiemi Souen.
It definitely sounds good. And it's nice that you have that, you know, that legacy as part of your name. That's very special. You know, and in your book, you use a lot of Okinawan as well as Japanese. Mm-hmm. And I just, you know, can you speak to the importance of using Okinawan? You know, I think, you know, you had talked before about there not being that Okinawan voice in literature, but you know, just talk to us a little bit about that.
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I really wanted to make a book that I wish I had as a child, that was like an example of what it meant culturally, like to be Okinawan. When I was young, we had Japanese stories like Momotaro and Kaguya Hime, and I am half Japanese. So there were a lot of examples of that for me already. But to know what Okinawan was, I didn't really know until really I was in college and in my 20s, and I kind of sought out that knowledge. And I even, when I had friends that said they had ozoni for New Year's, I was like, what is that? And then, you know, I learned about mochi soup, and I thought like everybody had pig's feet soup for New Year's, right? Like other, I thought that was Japanese and that's what people had. But when I learned about ozoni, that was actually something new, introduced to me, not even when I was a child, but later in my 20s when I was in college. So yeah, I really, the purpose, you know, a big purpose of doing this story was to put out an example for other children to, you know, be able to see themselves in literature. if they were Okinawan.
And you spent a year in university at the University of the Ryukyus. How was that? How much did you enjoy that year?
It was really life-changing. I think it was, when I first started Sanshin in college, my grand uncle Chuck Jichaku was also played Sanshin, and he introduced me to Grant Murata. And at that time, Kenton, another sensei, Kenton Odo, had just come back from Okinawa, and Jun Ueunten was another sensei, and they all had this wonderful experience and also encouraged me to also take the same opportunity and apply for the Okinawan prefectural government scholarship that they had for Okinawan descendants that were born and raised outside of Okinawa. So while I was there, I was at the University of the Ryukyu studying Okinawa. I studied Okinawan language, women's studies, and Japanese culture. They also encouraged me outside of school to go to Terukina Choichi's dojo, where I kind of immersed myself more in the art of Uta Sanshin. And then I came home, and the story didn't come out right away. And actually I pursued like trying to get my CPA designation. And then long story short, I became ill, and then I was lost. I didn't know what to do with my life. And I started to reflect on my time there, and I found out writing was healing for me. And then I wanted to share the wisdom of my sensei, and it kind of snowballed from there. I mean, there's a lot to be said about that journey, but basically I think this book wouldn't be possible if I did not have that experience in Okinawa. And I have a lot of friends and senseis to thank for encouraging me to go.
Yeah. And I know at the end of your book, you have 2 full pages of mahalos to people who helped or encouraged you along the way. And so before we start talking about the book, I did want to ask about, how it is to be an editor, and then you're also a poet and a novelist, and how that all coexists.
It kind of started off, like I said, like I was working at my parents' CPA firm, and I was studying. I actually got a graduate certificate in accounting and studying for the CPA exam. And I lost count of how many times I failed the different sections. And then I got better after I overcame something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And then I decided to balance my life better. And then I was diagnosed with lupus. And then I said, well, I kind of like writing. I was doing it as a hobby for friends and some of the nonprofit organizations, and decided, well, maybe I should focus on this. And then I spent some time freelancing or not having a job. And then I wrote and wrote more, and felt that in the end, it became more, as I keep saying, it was more of a healing. So that's when I kind of connected with Auntie Lois, and I started with poetry and literature. But I also had experience like doing press releases and things for these nonprofits. And I also like did high school journalism, which I really, really loved. And then for whatever reason, I detoured, but I went back to that because I remembered that really brought me a lot of joy. And then I approached Carlene at an event someplace, and I said, I'm looking for more writing jobs. So she had me freelance a little bit for Herald, and then there was a job opening, and so I took on the staff writer position. And then before you knew it, I became an editor. So I think in April 2020, yeah. And then at first I was really afraid because Carlene, I was afraid I couldn't be another Carlene, but then what happened was COVID came, and in a really weird way, I felt like, well, I navigated my way through my own illness through writing. And I felt like this like kind of familiar feeling of that's what I'm doing again as an editor now, was like, we have COVID, it's an illness. How can I help the community kind of through my awareness that we can be a community, and I have this experience and I can help them maybe also through our publication, and find a way to best support the community during this, really difficult time. So does that, I think that answers your question?
Yeah, no, it does. And, I think so many, of course, horrible things have happened during COVID and devastating things, but, every now and then you hear people talk about ways that, they were able to definitely not only get through it or continue to get through it, but actually, take it and do something with it and have something come out of it. But, so let's talk a little bit more about the book. And you alluded to this early on, but let's talk about how the book came about. But let's talk about your beautiful screen behind you, because that is the cover of the book, and it's beautiful and inspirational. Let's talk about that first.
Yeah, I knew for sure that there needed to be a phoenix in the story somewhere, somehow. And because Terukina Choichi would have these performances, I think almost every year, but the recurring theme was always Tobe, which means to fly, sekai, to the world. And he always had like a phoenix or some enchanting bird as part of the design on his programs. And when I was introduced to Flora Kaneshiro and she did some samples, like the phoenix was exactly, like, I want to say exactly how I imagined it in my mind. And I was like, well, she needs to be the illustrator. And so there's a couple of places within the book in Choichi's dreams. He's flying around the world on a phoenix, sharing Uta Sanshin. And then I won't spoil it, but the phoenix makes an appearance at the end as well.
So for those who didn't pre-order your books and haven't received them yet, and you can buy them on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. They literally just came out this past week. The book is loosely based on the real life story of Terukina Sensei, a Sanshin player, national treasure in Okinawa, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And talk about him, talk about your relationship with him and what inspired you to do this book about him.
So I think this book is kind of autobiographical also because of like, the challenges, but also like a lot of the wisdom. So I believe Terukina Choichi Sensei is a national living treasure, not because of his amazing like ability to sing and play. He is truly gifted in that way, but also in his students, he uses his platform to share wisdom. And he has a lot of wisdom that is really applies to our life. And so like through this process, I really realized like that life is kind of like a dojo, and you have all these senseis, some that bring great light, like Terukina Choichi Sensei, and sometimes we learn through like darkness, through illness or challenges. But if we look at the bigger picture, like a lot of these things, if we see that they happen for us and not to us, then it, even the hard stuff can be something that we're really grateful for. And I think that was something that I took from Terukina Sensei that I wanted to share. When I was there, a lot of us we had free access to the dojo. We knew where the key was. We could go in anytime. We could practice. There were videos. A lot of times if he could hear us practicing, he would come up and join us and just start teaching us. It wasn't just during class time. If he heard us in there, he'd come in and instruct us. And sometimes we just practice on our own. Also, if we were there at mealtime, his wife would invite us in, and sometimes we also share a meal. So it they really treated us like family.
And this is a picture of, is this a picture of you and he in Okinawa?
Yes, so this was just before I left. I had my Sanshin repaired, and of course he helped me kind of facilitate that, because if I had gone by myself, I might not have the great service that I had without Sensei. So Sensei took me to go pick up my Sanshin before I came home to Hawaii, and he drove us around. He showed me where Chinen was, where he grew up, and shared some things that appear in the book, like he used to practice in the ocean, or sometimes neighbors said that oh, he's singing all the time, and and then so a lot of the little stories I would hear from him, I remembered, or how I remembered it, I tried to put it in the story, especially the wisdom. I think that's the biggest thing that I wanted to share. He used his great gift to share wisdom. It wasn't to be a superstar or anything like that. It was really to show aloha to people. And
I was gonna say, and in the book, it's not as if it's about a young boy who follows his dream, but he's not quite sure what his dream is, or what that Ikigai is, what his purpose is, and it manifests itself. But it takes you through all of the, for lack of a better word, failures or things that didn't work out, and how he learned from them. And this is technically a children's book, but when I read it, I thought, is it really just a children's book? I don't think so. I think it's an adult book too. What were you thinking when you were writing it? Was it specifically for children, or was it for anybody?
Sure. I mean, this is based also, like I said, on a lot of my emotional journey, and about challenges, and him trying in the story, he tries all these different things that he sees other people having joy. And that kind of reminded me of when you're growing up, when you're a kid, you naturally have the intuition to do things that are fun for you. And then as you grow up, then you get all the shoulds and have tos and the expectations, and really that can be louder than your inner voice if you let it. But in this book, I wanted to show something that I didn't learn as a child. I learned it much later, that, well, maybe we should, how about trusting that voice more sometimes? And maybe the shoulds and the have tos can be, you can see them, try them out, but what is it that really fills your heart with joy? And sometimes when you follow that and people see that, you can help them by shining your own light, and rather than trying to live up to, and sometimes it's family, sometimes it's your job, there's these expectations. We're so trained to follow that sometimes we forget how to listen to our na'au, right, our inner voice. So this is kind of believing in that, he does try different things, but then somewhere along the line, he says, no, this is what I love to do. This is what I want to do. And he has a good sensei. So his sensei affirms that, okay, then this is your Ikigai, and this is what you have to do. And it's not going to be easy.
Right. I know you sent over some other photographs. Are there any other ones you want me to share as you are speaking right now? I know you sent a really nice one of a group. I think this may be a Sanshin group. What was this one? Tell us about this picture. Who are these people?
Oh, this is my relatives in Okinawa. So while I was in Okinawa, then they would invite me over every weekend. This was like, I think around New Year's. So it was a big get together, and I had only met like maybe 3 or 4 of them that visited Hawaii. But so this was like when I went to Okinawa, the first time I got to meet just about everybody who's there. So the connection is it's my grandfather's cousin and his children, grandchildren, and probably now there's great grandchildren.
Right.
So I got to, this is my family in Okinawa.
Oh, that's wonderful. I feel like I see pickled pig's feet on the far left platter. And it says it's January 1st, 1999. So it was New Year's. Mm-hmm. How great. So would you be willing to do a little reading from the book?
Sure.
Okay.
So the excerpt I chose is when Choichi kind of decides at the beginning of the story like, okay, this is what I think my Ikigai is, but then he comes across some challenges. So Choichi sang and played his Sanshin every day. The more he practiced, the better he got. But sometimes he played the wrong notes, or he sang too high or too low. I want to quit, Choichi said to himself with a heavy heart after an especially difficult day. I can sing the songs, I can play the Sanshin, but I can't sing and play together. It's too hard. Choichi then set off to a sacred place called Seifa Utaki. At Seifa Utaki, there was a stone shrine where legend says the goddess of creation Amami Kiyo once came down from heaven to create the islands of Okinawa. She brought with her treasures of lush green trees, vibrant flowers, and granite rocks. There, listening to the soothing symphony of salty wind strumming through the leaves, Choichi thought, Ute Sanshin is hard, but it's my dream to deliver happiness to every shore the ocean touches. Then the soothing breeze spoke, there lies your purpose. That is your Ikigai, Amami Kiyo's voice whispered to him in that wind. But Choichi still wasn't sure. Every day he saw children practicing other arts, radiant with joy. One day, Choichi told Miyazato sensei that he wondered if karate, eisa, or odori were just as fun as uta sanshin. Miyazato sensei said, only you can feel the radiant joy in your heart. You must explore and find what fills you with light. So Choichi went out and tried karate. But the karate sensei made him punch rocks. Then he tried eisa, but the odaiko drum was heavier than he was. Then he tried odori, but it wasn't for him either. With 2 left feet, he didn't have the grace and coordination of a dancer. Each time Choichi tried and failed another art, he pulled out his sanshin and sang to cheer himself up. He played over and over, striving to memorize songs. Each day, I sing and play a little less from my brain and a little more from my heart. He realized that after a while. And that thought, his heart filled with a radiant light, so bright he had to burst out in song. He stood up with his head held high and headed home singing his favorite song. Makutu Fuituchi no Uchi Usami. You must be genuine when sharing your gift in this world. Nuyu di ikutu Banu awang uchuda. If you live this way, you will surely be happy.
Beautiful. So I guess the $1 million question is, how does one find their Ikigai? How does one find their purpose? And in the book, he listens to his heart, and you talk about the Yaruki Shinkun, right? Listening to the heart, that the answers are in your heart. And often when you're in Japan, people say, you know, kotai wa kokoro no, you know, the answer is in your heart, but they also talk about heart being mind, right? They'll say it's in your mind, but when they say the word mind, they point to the heart. So is it philosophically more easy to find your purpose in Okinawa or Japan and those Asian cultures because there is so much, people are always talking about listening to your heart and listening to your mind more so than Western cultures? What do you think?
I don't know like what I think about that. I just know like because this is based on my personal experience, and I don't think it's easy to find for everyone to find their ikigai. I think some people find it very young. Like for me, I went through like a lot of listening to the other opinions and not trusting that like I don't know what's good for me. I didn't think I knew what was good for me, so I think it took me a long time. But I think being ill was the biggest one. Like I couldn't work, I couldn't do anything. So it gave me time. And I think that's why it's so relevant during this COVID time. Like during that time, I really, also medicine couldn't help me. So I really had to think about like, I started to be more intuitive. And I think it's like a muscle, you have to exercise it. It's like, okay, what makes me feel better or healed, and eventually was like or happy or joyful, and then I would just kind of do more of that, right? And then what made me feel heavy, guilty, all those fearful, okay, if that made me feel that like that, then maybe I won't do so much of that. So for me, it was found really through a lot of struggle and hardships, and I think that's why in the story I wanted Choichi to not just be like, this is my gift, I'm born good at it, and because sometimes that's what we think when we see Bruno Mars or whatever, right? Like that he had no struggle and he could sing on key with this great voice, right? But I think the reality of it is we see the end result too often, and we don't see how hard it really is to find your life purpose and to keep going at it. And then when you do get really good, how to inspire others to find their own. I think that so it's always continuing and learning what the next challenge is.
Right. We have a question from Grant, and he's asking, how much do you think your ancestors played a part in you finding your own Ikigai to write this book?
My ancestors, I think that's huge. I mean, if one thing went differently along this whole journey from my ancestors to now, and I'm glad he asked that question. I know he's my sensei, so he knows what questions to ask. But I found out that when I looked back in my ancestors' history, there were poets that worked for, the royal family when the Ryukyus was a kingdom. So the legacy of poetry and music goes back generations, but I didn't, I wouldn't have learned that if I didn't seek that out. So if there's any, if something guided me toward it, I don't know like why I took an interest to go back to Okinawa. I don't know how all that happened, but perhaps, I'd hear little things and still wasn't interested. Like I knew my great grandfather played Sanshin, that he brought his Sanshin from Okinawa, and that one of his sons, who's my uncle, was also very active in the performing arts community in Hawaii. He is a Nisei, right? And but it still took me till my 20s to really want to go back to that. But once I was connected to those roots and learned about them, I was like, yeah, my ancestors had a lot to do with where I am today and what I do.
How do you think they would feel about this book and that you followed your heart and you wrote this book and are sharing it with the greater population?
I would hope that they'd be proud and happy that we're still, I mean, not just this book, but that there are those of us bringing the values of our motherland, you know, and everything down to the Issei coming here and working hard, the Nisei and their sacrifice, and the Sanshin. And now we're faced with like this coronavirus. So more so for me, I'm looking back at how they survived their challenges, because we're fighting like a different battle in our own generation, right? So those values are important more than ever now, I think.
Yep. Let's talk about the journey of getting your book published, because on this series we have had self-published writers, we have had traditionally published writers, but yours, you are the first one who had a book published the way that you did. So please tell us about that. It's fascinating.
Well, I think you call it crowd publishing. So it's like crowdfunding, something like Kickstarter, but this company called Publishizer does like sort of a Kickstarter for publishing books. And the journey of this is really like the Ikigai Choichi story, because I started writing this story over 5 years ago. And then I connected with Lois Yamanaka, and then she really helped me develop it and make it pretty and nice. And then, but it wasn't, and then we tried doing it the traditional way, where you enter writing contests and you try to get the attention of a publisher or agent, and then they're supposed to find the illustrator for you. That's kind of the normal way. Or self-publishing, where you do everything yourself and you finance it and everything yourself. So it wasn't until just a few years ago that Alice Inoue, the life coach, said she used Publishizer, and she told me about it. Like, you kind of put it up here and you try to get pre-orders, and then how interested people are in your book will get the attention of publishers. And then so all these publishers will contact you and say, I want to help publish your book. And it's everything from self-publishers to hybrid and then traditional. I was ready to just like self-publish, but there were a few mentors that knew about the story and said, Hawaii has such a great support for Okinawans already, and this story needs to be told beyond the shores of Hawaii. Like, you know, and that was true, because I really wanted to give an Okinawan child, or, you know, any child that wanted to learn about a different culture or ethnicity, an example of what it was to be Okinawan. So they said, you need to try to get a bigger reach. And so through Publishizer, I got some great offers and got connected with Brandy Lane Publishing, who believed in my book. And so it was like the non-traditional way, where I used this crowd publishing, got the attention of a publisher, when it really got rejected a lot of times. So just like Choichi, I had to trust, and I had like a lot of people cheer me on. And when I kind of put it on the back burner, they would remind me like, oh, so when is your book coming out? Are you still trying to get your book out? You know, so there were people who kind of pushed me and challenged me, saying like, you know, see this, you have to see this to the end, because they believed in the book. So it was a long journey, and it was hard, even though you see all the celebrations on social media now. It was really learning, just like Choichi, to believe in myself.
Believe in yourself, and you talk about it a lot, that support base that you've had, community support base, friends, teachers, family, I'm sure. And that's so important to have that support base. Kevin Kawamoto is asking, what is the process like working with an illustrator? Did you write the text first and then the illustrator followed with the illustrations, or did the words and illustrations evolve together? And you talked a little bit about the illustrator early on, but we didn't get into any details.
Yeah, so I had the story first. And then my really good friend, Allison Nakamoto, who was was from LA, and then we were in Okinawa together and we became really close. But then she was our mutual friend. So she introduced me to Flora Kaneshiro, who lives in Argentina. And she says, I think, maybe these illustrations would be great for your story. And then so I reached out to Flora, and she also knew Terukina sensei and spent time in Okinawa on the same scholarship we all had. And then she was really excited about the project. And so she goes, I'm going to draw a few samples. And I immediately knew she had to do it because she knew him. She knew what I was trying to communicate with the story. And then I talk about the phoenix being I was like, that is exactly how in my imagination I could see that phoenix. So it wasn't a question of, going out to try out other illustrators. I knew immediately that she had to be the one. And a lot of people said, oh, you shouldn't do that. You're going to mess up your chances of, getting a publisher, because usually the publisher likes to use their pool of illustrators. But Brandy Lane saw, the whole package, and they agreed that this is, we love this story and the illustrations are perfect. And they accepted both of us, the story and the illustrations.
That's fantastic. So I know anyone who's been following you on Facebook or Instagram knows that you have been sending out boxes and boxes and boxes of books. But someone just wrote in and said they pre-ordered your book and was wondering when they might be receiving it. So could it have been one of those big batches that you took to the
Yeah, it could have been, because I just went yesterday. So the ones that I'm mailing out are the orders from that crowd publishing. So that happened early 2020, just before the pandemic. So Grant, who's online, and then my other senseis took me to all the Okinawa New Year's parties, and that's why we were so successful. So if you ordered through Publishizer or one of those Okinawan clubs, those are the ones that I mailed out myself. But from the 17th, after the launch, anything that's ordered on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or I believe even Target, those will be taken care of by those companies.
Okay. And Carolyn Morinishi, who came on with her mother at the beginning of the year for Afternoon with the Author, says that we don't have to talk about this during the webinar, but I'm going to anyway. So she is a Nihon Bunyo teacher, Buyo teacher, the Japanese dance, and her late sensei taught a similar lesson, like dance from your soul, and then you can touch the souls of others. And she's just giving you some amazing mahalos and congratulations for what you're doing. But so true, right? Having that love of something and then not just keeping it to yourself, but sharing it with the world. So important. So, you were talking earlier about the words should and guilt, and I feel like should is one of the most terrible words that we use, like you should do this and you should do that. And, we have a lot of younger people as like high school students that watch these seminars as well. Like what piece of wisdom would you share with one of them right now as it relates to that word of should, this is what you should be doing. How can you balance should with what you know in your heart is something you want to do?
Right. Well, I think there's a place for, like, people give you opinions because they care about you. And I think you can, if it's someone you respect, of course you can consider them, but ultimately it's your choice. So it's this hard question for me to answer because there's so many ways to parent, and I have 2 teenagers myself, and I get asked a question like, oh, because you play Sanshin, or I've done dance also, like, are you gonna have your children do performing arts as well? I'm like, well, they have access to it. I tried, more than anything, I try to teach them the values, but the art itself, it's up to them. And I think for my kids too, I'm trying to teach them more to trust that inner voice. So if I tell them like they should play Sanshin, that would be hypocritical of me, because I also try to fulfill an expectation, and I never knew if I was doing it to the person's satisfaction. But what if you make a choice and you fail, then you own that failure, right? You don't have to blame someone and say, well, you told me I should do this, right? Then you can pass the blame too, right? Like, well, if my kids make a choice and they failed at it, then they own it. And then you say, well, what should you have done? And then then you're training them to listen to their own voice and, use their problem solving skills. They're in high school now, so they have learned enough. I'll give you an example. So when my son was in middle school, he had like a C in a class. And he said, Mom, are you upset with me because I have a C? And I said, it doesn't matter what I think. I was like, how do you feel about your C? And then he goes, well, I didn't turn in all my homework and I could have studied more, so he knows if he had tried really hard and got a C anywhere, he turned in all his homework, just studied for the test but didn't do good, that's a different thing. But he knew that he didn't turn in all his homework. He knew that he could have studied harder. So I said, so you could have got a better grade and you don't feel good about it. So next time, what are you going to do? I'm going to turn in all my homework. I'm going to study harder, right? So then I felt approaching it that way. How do you feel about it? If you don't feel good about it, then you have to do something about it. It doesn't matter if I'm disappointed in you or not, because eventually I'm not going to be there. But if you're disappointed in yourself, then you're responsible to do something about it, right?
Right. So Grant just wrote in and said, "Yareba dekiru desho." No, if you try it, you can do it. Carlene is asking, how did Lois Ann work with you in developing the story? And do you plan to write other children's books? A 2-part question there.
I think it's funny that Carlene's asking me that because she knows how much time I have now to read children's stories. But okay, so Lois Ann was, once she agreed I wore her down and she agreed to take me as a student. She was really strict. She'd say things like, when I'm critiquing your work, you're not allowed to cry. You have 2 minutes to defend something if you don't agree with me. And I think by the time at that point, I knew that if a sensei wasn't telling me I was doing something wrong and only telling me I was doing a good job, there's no way I was going to grow. So I really, and Lois Ann was that kind of teacher. So it kind of sounds backwards. Like every time I got scoldings or corrected, I felt very grateful because now I know how to do it right. And so it was that kind of strict standard, but very, basic. Like, I mean, there were technical things, don't use cliches, and she gave me exercises and prompts and things like that. I would take the story, she kind of tear it to shreds. She told me like, you have to make this better, but not exactly say how. So I had to figure out a lot of things by myself before, otherwise it'd be her writing it, not me, right? So she kind of sent me back to the drawing board like hundreds of times before we both felt like, okay, the story is ready. And poems are like that too. They're like half a page or 1 page, but people don't realize how much work goes into that. And then so I would love to write another book. I don't know if it's a children's book, but I've been like writing little things, observations, like, I do meditation. So if something pops in my head, like some kind of realization, or I just observe something kind of grabs me, then I try to record those things, and maybe eventually I'll accumulate enough to do a collection. And yeah, but I don't feel like I have time.
You're a little bit busy right now.
Editor.
Scott Kikkawa, another wonderful author, and we had him on a few months ago with his book Kona Winds, says, I think your poetry is wonderful too. How much of your experience as a poet informs your prose writing?
Oh, a lot. Like totally, because I did try to have this book be as poetic as possible. I mean, it is, to me, it is, it's a story, it's prose, but it's poetic, I think. So I think a lot of my learning through poetry, which is a lot of short things, did inform pretty much everything that was written. I wanted the whole thing to be beautiful and poetic when it was read, and meaningful. So yeah.
And it is. So for those who haven't pre-ordered the book, you can go to Amazon or to Barnes and Noble and just type it in there, Ikigai by Chiemi Souen, and you can order it that way. We are gently coming to the end of our hour, which always surprises me because it feels like we just started talking a minute ago. Jody, I'm going to come back to you for some closing remarks. In the meantime, want to thank everybody for being a part of an afternoon with the author today. We really appreciate you being here and taking a part of your Saturday afternoon with us. Upcoming in September, we have Juliet Kono on Saturday, September 18th at 1:30. She will be talking about her book, Anshu, A Dark Sorrow. We do have that book available here at the Nisei Veterans Memorial Center. So if you're interested in a copy, you can email me. It is signed. Those copies are signed. And on Wednesday, September 22nd, we will have Ron Wakabayashi and Carol Hayashino coming on to talk about the Redress and Reparations movement 33 years later. Both of those individuals were part of the Reparations and Redress. So we're really looking forward to having them talk about that journey, as well as the what it means in today's society and culture, and what we can learn from that. So again, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website at nvmc.org to stay up to date on everything that is coming up. But right now I'm going to turn it back over to Miss Jody Chiemi Souen to give us some closing remarks.
Well, the first thing I want to do is what everybody is. I want to thank like families, friends, everyone who came to this event. And, because like I said, this journey was kind of up and down, and sometimes drove my husband crazy because I wanted to take a CPA exam. Then I wanted to take a certification test, and that kind of, we're renovating a house. So there is a lot of like up and downs. So thanks to my family for putting up with that. And then like, just in the end, I just wanted to say, like, during this COVID time, to kind of use it like how I mentioned, like, I think life is a dojo, and I think this COVID is our sensei right now trying to teach us. And maybe now it's a good time to be like Choloichi, and we have time to not go out, but we have to stay at home so we can listen to our na'au without, our distractions are lessened a lot because of COVID, and the numbers are going up. So we have to be safe. But yeah, so in this story and in this time of COVID, I think, the lesson is to have hope and be grateful.
Thank you. And I wrote that down. Life is a dojo. So important. I'm going to think on that, as we all will. So thank you again, Jody Chiemi Ching, for being with us today. Congratulations on your book. We are so excited that you were part of this today. And all of you for watching, thank you so much. And we will see you next month. So stay safe and be well. Ahui ho.
Bye. Thank you.